The church bells of Wiltshire tolled before sunrise. Not for a wedding, for a woman. Thousands stood along the muddy road leading to the Draycott Church, their black coats dark against the pale September fog. Farmers, servants, gentlemen, widows clutching prayer books. 32 tenants rode slowly behind the hearse in mourning cloaks. But the whispers among them carried something sharper than grief. Everyone knew who had killed her. Not with poison, not with a pistol. He had killed her with a marriage. Inside the black carriage lay the coffin of Mron. Lady Catherine Tilney Long Wellesley, dead at only 35, once the richest heiress in England, and the wife of one of the most feared men in society, the Duke who had married her for 40,000 a year, and who never expected she would become the only woman capable of taking his children away from him. But Catherine's story did not begin with a coffin. It began with a ballroom. London, spring of 1810. Crystal chandeliers burned like stars above Downes Devonshire House, their light reflecting off diamonds, polished floors, and the calculating smiles of half the aristocracy. The season had begun, and every nobleman in the room was watching the same girl. Miss Catherine Tilney Long stood beside a marble pillar, small in stature but impossible to ignore. Dark eyes, quiet composure, a white silk gown trimmed with silver thread. She looked calm, but inside she was exhausted. 5 years, 5 entire seasons of London society had hunted her like a prize mare, because Catherine was not merely pretty. She was wealthy beyond imagination. At 16 she had inherited estates across Wiltshire, Essex, and Hampshire, along with Wanstead House, a Palladian palace rivaling the greatest estates in England. And with it came something far more dangerous, the 40,000 a year, 4 times the fortune that made Mr. Darcy legendary in novels, enough money to make princes bow and dukes calculate. Across the ballroom 3 men argued quietly near the champagne table. She refused the Duke of Clarence, one murmured. Imagine refusing a future king. Another man laughed. She did not refuse the crown, she refused his debts. Catherine heard none of this. She had learned long ago that listening to such talk only sharpened the loneliness, because every compliment felt like a transaction, every smile like an invoice, and every proposal like a contract written in invisible ink. Miss Tilney Long, she turned. A gentleman stood before her she did not immediately recognize. Tall, broad-shouldered. His evening coat fit too perfectly to be accidental. But it was his expression that caught her attention. Not greedy, not eager, simply amused. William Wellesley Pole, he said with an elegant bow. May I steal a moment of your evening? The name meant something. Nephew to the rising military hero, Arthur Wellesley. Connected, distinguished, and, if rumors were correct, deeply in debt. Catherine suppressed a weary smile. I believe half the room would prefer you did not. Half the room, he replied lightly, is here for your fortune. And you are not? He paused, for just a moment. Then he shrugged. I would settle for a conversation. That answer surprised her enough to laugh. A genuine laugh. And something changed in the air between them. They spoke for nearly 20 minutes. Not about estates. Not about income. Not about inheritance. He asked about the gardens at Wanstead House. He asked what books she read. When she mentioned a William Cowper Wye, the poet, his eyes lit with amusement. You have read Cowper? 3 times, she admitted. Then you are either a very patient reader or very stubborn. Both, she said softly, and for the first time in years Catherine forgot that she was being watched. Across the ballroom several men observed the scene with thin smiles. One whispered quietly, There he is. Another chuckled. The clever one. Because society already understood something Catherine did not. William Wellesley Pole was charming. Brilliantly charming. But charm in London society was rarely innocent. It was usually in strategy how. Over the following months he appeared everywhere. Garden parties, concerts, country dinners. Each time polite, never pressing, never mentioning her fortune. When he finally proposed the first time, Catherine refused gently. He smiled and accepted the answer. When he proposed again 2 months later, she refused again. He bowed, apologized for troubling her, and asked if she would still dance. By the sixth proposal, her friends were exasperated. He will never stop, one lady sighed, because he knows something the others do not. What is that? That eventually, the woman said, watching William across the room. Even the strongest woman grows tired of being alone. The seventh proposal came on a quiet evening in the gardens of Derwanstead House. The moonlight silvered the long lawns. Fountains whispered in the distance. William stood beside her beneath the shadow of an old oak tree. "I have asked you 7 times, he said softly. "You have," Catherine agreed. "And yet you continue refusing me." "I have learned caution." He nodded slowly. "Then allow me one final attempt." She turned toward him. "And if I refuse again? Then I will leave you in peace." For the first time since meeting him, his voice carried something dangerously close to sincerity. "Catherine," he said quietly, "I do not want your fortune." She studied his face carefully. "You are the only man in England who has not said that." "I am also," he replied, "the only man who has not asked for it." Silence stretched between them. The wind stirred the trees, and Catherine Tilney Long made the decision that would change the course of her life. "Very well," she said. William smiled slowly. "Is that a yes?" She nodded. "Yes." 2 months before the wedding, William quietly applied for a royal license and changed his name. He became William Tilney Long Wellesley. He took her family name before he took her hand. London society celebrated the match, but a few observers watched with unease because they understood something Catherine did not. The man she had just agreed to marry had arrived in London with nothing. And when a man with nothing marries the richest woman in England, it rarely ends with love. The wedding took place on a March 14, 1812, at St. James's Church, Piccadilly. 800 silver wedding favors, a necklace worth 25,000 guineas, carriages stretching down the street. And when the ceremony ended, William leaned close to his new bride and whispered something only she could hear. "Everything you own," he murmured softly, "is now ours." Catherine smiled. She thought it sounded romantic. But the older women in the church exchanged quiet glances, because they knew the truth. Under English law, a married woman owned nothing. Not her fortune, not her estates, not even her own name. Everything now belonged to her husband. And the moment Catherine Tilney Long spoke her vows, the richest woman in England had just become the most valuable possession in his life. The first cracks appeared quietly, so quietly that Catherine almost missed them. For the first few months after their wedding, life at Wanstead House seemed exactly as she had imagined. The vast Palladian mansion glowed with candlelight each evening, servants moved through marble corridors with polished precision, and William played the part of devoted husband with remarkable ease. He was attentive, charming, amusing in company. Guests adored him. And when their first son was born in January of 1901, Catherine believed, truly believed, that marriage had softened him into something steadier. The baby was small and red-faced, his cries echoing softly through the grand nursery overlooking the gardens. William held the boy with theatrical pride. "My heir," he declared to the visiting guests. Catherine smiled from her bed, weak but glowing with quiet joy. For a moment, just one fragile moment, it looked like happiness. But happiness in aristocratic houses often hides behind closed doors. And behind the glittering facade of Wanstead House, William had already begun spending her fortune. It started with improvements, small things, or so he called them: new draperies for the East Gallery, a redesigned music salon, a shipment of French furniture that arrived one afternoon in 12 enormous crates. Catherine noticed the invoices stacked on William's desk. The numbers made her pause. "Are these necessary?" she asked gently one evening. William did not even look up from his wine. "My dear Catherine," he replied with a careless smile, "Wanstead must reflect the dignity of its owners." "It already does." "Not yet," he said smoothly, "not the way I intend." She hesitated. Women of her rank were not taught to question financial decisions. In fact, society considered it improper. The management of money was a husband's privilege, and Catherine, raised to be dutiful, forced herself to trust him. By Conamadorn, the entertainments began. Grand ones, lavish even by London standards. William announced a magnificent celebration at Wanstead House to honor his uncle's victories in the war against Napoleon. The Prince Regent himself was rumored to attend. Preparations consumed the entire estate. Garden lanterns were strung through the trees. Hundreds of servants were hired for the evening. Orchestras arrived from London. Fireworks were ordered from Paris. Catherine watched the frenzy from the upper balcony as carriages began arriving along the sweeping drive. Footmen rushed through the halls carrying silver trays. Guests poured through the doors. Ladies in shimmering silk gowns, gentlemen glittering with medals. It looked like a royal celebration, but something felt wrong, very wrong, because Catherine had not been invited. She discovered the truth only minutes before the guests arrived. A housemaid approached nervously near the staircase. "Begging your pardon, my lady." Catherine turned. "Yes?" The girl swallowed. "Mr. Wellesley Pole has requested that you remain in the East Wing this evening." The words hung in the air like frost. Catherine blinked. "I beg your pardon?" The maid's eyes dropped to the floor. "He said you were not to attend the gathering." For a moment Catherine did not move. She could hear music beginning downstairs, the distant laughter of arriving guests, her own house filling with voices. And yet she stood there, unwelcome in the very place she owned. "I see," she said quietly. The maid curtsied quickly and fled. Catherine stood alone on the staircase, then slowly turned back toward the empty corridor. She spent the evening in her mother's old sitting room. The windows were open slightly, and the summer air carried the faint sound of violins drifting from the ballroom. Below her, somewhere in the glittering rooms of Wanstead, the Prince Regent himself was drinking champagne. William was hosting the most celebrated party of the year, in her house, paid for with her fortune, and she was not permitted to attend. Catherine sat very still, hands folded in her lap. The humiliation was so quiet it almost felt invisible. No shouting, no cruelty spoken aloud, just absence, just erasure. Over the next few years the pattern deepened. William gambled recklessly. He purchased political influence. He ran expensive campaigns for parliamentary seats. He borrowed enormous sums from London merchants who trusted the fortune of his wife. And Catherine began hearing whispers about mistresses, about gambling debts, about the extraordinary sums her husband was losing at the card tables of London. By waiting for him, their second son was born. 2 years later, a daughter, 3 children in a house growing colder each season, and Catherine loved them fiercely, more fiercely than anyone expected. The quiet woman society had once called delicate suddenly became something far more dangerous. A mother, because mothers notice things other people ignore. The ledgers growing thinner, the servants dismissed quietly, the constant arrival of creditors' letters. One evening she opened a financial account William had forgotten to lock away. Her breath caught. The numbers were staggering. He had already spent nearly half her fortune. Half, in just a few years. And when she confronted him for the first time, William only laughed. "My dear Catherine," he said lazily, swirling his brandy, "money is meant to be enjoyed." She stared at him across the candlelight. "That was my father's fortune." William's smile cooled. "It is mine now." Silence fell across the room, and Catherine Tilney Long understood something that chilled her far deeper than humiliation ever had. She had not married a charming man. She had married a man who believed he owned her, and everything she had ever loved. By the winter of 1816, Catherine stopped asking about the money. Not because she trusted William, but because she had begun to understand something far more frightening. He did not consider the fortune endangered. He considered it limitless. Wanstead House became a theater for his excess. New furniture arrived weekly. Rare wines filled the cellars. Tailors and jewelers extended credit simply because his name now included Tilney Long. To the outside world, it looked like dazzling aristocratic grandeur. Inside the house, it felt very different. Catherine noticed the silences, servants whispering when they thought she was not near, bills quietly removed from desks, and William's absences growing longer. One evening in early spring, Catherine was walking through the south gallery when she heard laughter drifting from the music room. A woman's laughter, soft, intimate. She paused. The door was slightly open. Through the narrow gap she saw William standing beside the piano with a lady in pale blue silk. The woman's gloved hand rested lightly on his arm as they spoke. William leaned closer to whisper something. The woman laughed again. It was not the polite laugh of society. It was the laugh of someone very comfortable, very familiar. Catherine stood frozen in the hallway. No one had told her directly. No scandal sheet had printed his name. But in that moment she understood what London had already begun whispering. William had taken a mistress, and he had not even bothered to hide her from his own household. She walked away quietly. No confrontation, no dramatic scene. The marble floors echoed softly beneath her slippers as she returned to the nursery. Inside, the children were gathered around the fireplace. Their eldest son, little Crux William, sat reading aloud from a book while his younger brother leaned against his shoulder. Victoria, only a toddler, slept in her nurse's arms. Catherine stood in the doorway watching them. For a moment, something sharp and protective flickered behind her calm expression. Her sons looked up. "Mama?" She stepped inside and smiled. "Continue reading," she said softly. The boys obeyed, and Catherine sat beside them, listening to their small voices filling the quiet room. But that night she could not sleep. Rain struck the tall windows of Wanstead House. The corridors felt colder than usual. From somewhere distant in the house, music drifted faintly. William entertaining guests again. Without her, Catherine sat upright in bed staring into the darkness. For the first time since their wedding, she allowed herself to think the unthinkable. She had made a terrible mistake, but mistakes could sometimes be endured. What she feared now was something worse. William's debts were growing, his appetites were growing, and if the fortune disappeared, what would happen to the children? The answer came sooner than she expected. One afternoon a letter arrived from a London banker. It had been addressed to William but opened by accident among household correspondence. Catherine read it once, then again. Her hands went cold. William's debts had exceeded 200,000 all, an impossible sum, even for her fortune. She folded the letter slowly. Outside the window, the gardens of Wanstead stretched wide and beautiful beneath the pale English sky. The house looked eternal, unshakable, but Catherine suddenly saw something no one else yet recognized. The foundations of her world were already beginning to collapse, and the man responsible slept peacefully in the next room. The truth revealed itself slowly, not through confession, but through humiliation. By 1808, Wanstead House had become less a home and more a stage for William's vanity. Banquets stretched late into the night. Gambling tables appeared in private salons. Musicians played until dawn while guests staggered through candlelit corridors. Catherine attended some of these gatherings at first. She stood beside her husband, smiling politely, wearing diamonds that had once belonged to her mother, but she began noticing something else. The way certain women looked at William, too familiar, too confident, and the way William avoided Catherine's eyes when those women entered the room. One night during a winter ball, Catherine stepped outside onto the terrace to escape the heat of the crowded ballroom. Snow had begun falling across the gardens. The lanterns hanging from the trees cast soft golden circles across the white ground. She breathed slowly, grateful for the quiet. Then she heard footsteps behind her. A lady's voice spoke softly. "You should not leave the ballroom tonight." Catherine turned. Before her stood a woman she recognized vaguely from London society. Beautiful, composed, and wearing a necklace Catherine had last seen in William's study. "I beg your pardon?" Catherine said calmly. The woman studied her with something almost like pity. "You truly do not know." Catherine felt the cold deepen beneath her skin. "Know what?" The woman hesitated, then sighed. "You are not the mistress of this house anymore." Silence fell between them. Snow drifted slowly across the terrace. Inside the ballroom, laughter echoed beneath the chandeliers. Catherine's voice remained steady. "I believe you are mistaken." The woman's expression softened. "No," she replied quietly. "You are." Catherine returned inside the ballroom with perfect composure. No one watching would have noticed anything unusual. She even danced once, smiled twice. But when she found William near the card tables later that evening, she spoke in a voice only he could hear. "Your companion seems very comfortable in my home." William barely looked up from his cards. "You must be more specific." "The lady in blue silk." He placed another wager. "You mean Mrs. Armitage? Is that her name?" William finally glanced at her. His eyes held neither shame nor apology. "Do not embarrass yourself, Catherine." Her heart pounded. "I am your wife." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "And you are very well provided for." The cruelty of the sentence was almost casual, as though her pain were simply an inconvenience. Catherine stood very still. "You are humiliating me." William smiled faintly. "No, my dear. You are humiliating yourself." That night Catherine walked alone through the endless corridors of Wanstead House, past the gallery where her ancestors' portraits hung, past the library her father had loved, past the great staircase where guests still laughed below. Every room carried memories, childhood summers, family dinners, her mother's voice, and suddenly she realized something unbearable. None of it belonged to her anymore. Not the house, not the fortune, not even the children, legally. Under English law they belonged to William. Everything belonged to him. everything. 2 months later, the first creditor arrived at the gates, then another, and the rumors spreading through London society grew sharper each week. William Wellesley Pole was drowning in debt, and the fortune of Catherine Tilney Long was vanishing with terrifying speed. But the true devastation had not yet begun, because the next betrayal would not cost Catherine money. It would cost her her home. The end of Wanstead House began with an auction notice. Catherine first saw it in a London newspaper on a grey morning in down 8:22. At first she did not understand what she was reading. The advertisement listed furniture, carpets, silver, portraits, books, hundreds of items from the estate of K. Wanstead House, her estate, her father's house, her childhood home. She read the notice twice before the truth struck her. William was selling everything. The auction lasted around 32 days. 32 days during which strangers walked through the rooms where Catherine had grown up. They touched the desks her father had written at. They examined paintings of her ancestors. They lifted porcelain cups her mother had once used at breakfast. Each object was labeled, priced, and sold, lot by lot, piece by piece, a century of family history disappearing under the hammer of an auctioneer. Catherine was not there. By then, William had already taken the family abroad to escape creditors. They were living in Paris, then later moving between Italian cities where English aristocrats often fled their debts. Catherine heard the details only through letters from England, each letter describing another room emptied, another piece gone, another memory scattered into strangers' homes. But the final blow came in at Twimber. The house itself could not legally be sold. Her father's will had prevented the estate from being broken apart, so the trustees made the only decision left. They demolished Wanstead House, the Palladian mansion that had rivaled the greatest houses in England, the place where Catherine had once believed she would raise her children. The house where she had been a girl, it was reduced to rubble, sold for scrapstone. Catherine never saw it again. By then her health had begun to fail. The stomach pains that had started years earlier had grown worse. Doctors offered tonics, rest, mercury treatments that left her weak and trembling. Nothing helped. Some whispered the illness had come from William, from diseases passed between his many affairs. Catherine never spoke about it openly, but the pain remained, constant, quiet, and exhausting. Meanwhile, William had grown even more reckless. In Naples, home, he installed his newest mistress openly inside their household, a woman named Helena Bly. Catherine saw her at breakfast one morning, seated comfortably beside William, as though she belonged there. The children were in the room. Her sons stared at their plates in silent confusion. Victoria clutched Catherine's hand beneath the table. William did not appear embarrassed. If anything, he seemed amused by Catherine's composure. After breakfast, she confronted him privately. "You will not bring that woman into our home again." William poured himself another glass of wine. "I already have. You disgrace your family." He shrugged. "My family survives. And your wife?" William looked at her with cool indifference. "My dear Catherine, you survived as well." That night, Catherine lay awake listening to the sounds of laughter drifting from the salon where William entertained Helena and their guests. Her children slept in nearby rooms. The house felt smaller now, heavier, filled with humiliation. But beneath the pain, something else began forming quietly in Catherine's mind. A decision, because she could endure the loss of her fortune. She could endure society's whispers. But there was one thing she would not allow William to take: her children. And for the first time in 13 years of marriage, Catherine Tilney Long began planning how to escape him. The decision came on a suffocating summer evening in Naples, 1824. The shutters of the rented villa were closed against the heat, yet the air inside remained thick and restless. Outside, the Mediterranean shimmered beneath the fading sun. Inside, Catherine waited. William arrived late, not alone. Laughter drifted through the hall before the door opened. Helena Bly stepped inside first, radiant in pale silk, her confidence unmistakable. William followed with the careless ease of a man who believed the world belonged to him. He stopped when he saw Catherine standing in the drawing room. The silence that followed was heavy. Helena sensed it first. "I believe I should retire," she said smoothly. William waved a hand. "Do as you wish." The door closed behind her. Now only husband and wife remained. Catherine's hands were clasped in front of her, but her voice was steady. "You will end this." William removed his gloves slowly. "You sound tired." "I am." "That is unfortunate." "I mean it, William," she said quietly. "Your relationship with Mrs. Bly must end." He poured himself wine from the decanter. You mistake your position. My position, she repeated. Yes, he said calmly. You are my wife. And she? William lifted the glass to his lips. A pleasant companion. The cruelty was deliberate. Catherine felt the last of her restraint dissolve. You have taken my fortune, she said. You have destroyed my home. And now you parade your mistress through the same rooms where your children live. William set down the glass. Must we dramatize everything? I am not dramatizing, she replied coldly. I am warning you. That caught his attention. Warning me? If you follow us to England, if you attempt to interfere with the children, she continued slowly, I will begin divorce proceedings. The words hung between them like thunder. Divorce. In a 24 England, the word was almost unthinkable. William stared at her in disbelief. You would ruin yourself. I already am ruined. You would lose everything. I already have. His expression hardened. You will do no such thing. Catherine met his gaze without flinching. Try me. 2 weeks later, she left Naples. Without William, without permission, with 3 children. The journey north across Europe was long and exhausting. Carriages rattled over rough roads. Dust clung to the windows. The boys sat quietly, sensing something serious had changed. Little Victoria often slept against Catherine's shoulder during the long days of travel. Mama, she whispered once during the crossing of the channel. Yes, darling? Are we going home? Catherine looked toward the gray English horizon appearing through the mist. Yes, she said softly. We are going home. She settled with her sisters, Dorothy and Emma, in a modest house in near Richmond. For the first time in years, the house felt peaceful. No gambling tables, no whispered scandals, no strange women arriving in the night. The children played in the garden. Catherine read to them in the afternoons, and for a few fragile months it seemed as though she had escaped. But William was not a man who accepted defeat. When news reached him in Italy, his fury was immediate, not because he missed his wife, but because the children represented the last fortune he had not yet spent. He began writing letters, threats, legal notices, promises to take them back. One message reached Catherine late one evening. If the courts will not give me my children, I will take them by strategy. Catherine read the line twice, then quietly folded the letter. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes had never been clearer. William thought this was a battle of property. He was wrong. This was now a battle between a reckless man and a mother who had nothing left to lose. And Catherine Tilney Long was finally ready to fight. The pain began suddenly. It was early morning in Richmond, September of 1825, when Catherine collapsed beside her bed. Her sisters found her moments later, pale and shaking, her hands pressed against her stomach as waves of agony seized her body. The physician was summoned at once, but even before he arrived, Catherine seemed to understand something the others did not. She was dying. The house had grown quiet. The children had been sent to another room. Dorothy sat beside the bed while Emma prepared cloths and water, both women trying desperately to appear calm. But Catherine's eyes were clear, too clear. Dorothy, she whispered. Her sister leaned closer. Yes, Catherine? We must change the will. Dorothy froze. Now. The urgency in Catherine's voice left no room for argument. The previous will, drafted years earlier under William's influence, gave him control over the children's inheritance. If she died without altering it, everything would return to him, the same man who had destroyed her life, the same man who would spend the last of her children's fortune within months. No, Catherine whispered weakly. That must never happen. Within hours, a solicitor arrived at the house. Catherine dictated the changes slowly, her strength fading with each sentence. Her children were to inherit everything directly. Trustees would manage the estates. William was to have no authority whatsoever. The document was witnessed properly, signed carefully, sealed. By the time the solicitor departed, Catherine's hands trembled so badly she could barely hold the pen. But the work was done. The future of her children was protected. 5 days later, on September 12, 1825, Catherine Tilney Long died. She was 35 years old. Her final request had been simple: keep the children safe from their father. What followed shocked all of England, because Catherine's sisters did not retreat quietly into mourning. They went to court. With them stood an unexpected ally, Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington. William's own uncle, the hero of Waterloo, the most powerful man in Britain. Wellington had watched his nephew's destruction for years. Now, standing before the Court of Chancery, he made his position unmistakably clear. William Wellesley Pole was unfit to raise his own children. The evidence was overwhelming. The debts, the affairs, the gambling, the destruction of Wanstead House, the mistreatment of his wife. The court listened, and then something unprecedented happened. For the first time in English legal history, a father was denied custody of his children because of his moral conduct. William lost completely. The children remained under protection of the court, exactly as Catherine had planned. Her final battle, won after her death. William's life unraveled quickly after that. He spent time in debtor's prison. His second marriage collapsed. The fortune he had chased his entire life was permanently beyond his reach. In later years, he survived on a small allowance. The man who had burned through $40,000 a year lived on barely $10 a week now. He died in Bergsjön alone in rented rooms. Few mourned him. But Catherine was remembered. Her funeral procession stretched for half a mile through Wiltshire. Thousands lined the road. Tenants rode in black cloaks behind the carriage. Servants wept openly outside Draycott Church, because the people who had known her remembered something society had forgotten: her kindness, her generosity, the quiet way she noticed everyone around her, even when she was the richest woman in England. Wanstead House is gone today. Nothing remains but open ground where the great mansion once stood. But the story of the woman who lived there did not disappear, because Catherine Tilney Long did something extraordinary. In a world where the law belonged entirely to men, she changed it. Her case became a legal precedent. Years later, reforms began appearing in English law. Mothers slowly gained rights over their children. Married women gained control of property, and the ancient rule that fathers owned everything began to crumble. It did not happen overnight, but it began with a woman lying in a small bedroom in Richmond, refusing to let the man who destroyed her life destroy her children too. History called her the Wiltshire heiress, but that title was never the most important thing about her. Her fortune vanished. Her house was demolished. Her marriage ruined her life. Yet in the end, Catherine Tilney Long accomplished something far greater than wealth. She protected her children, and she made sure the man who married her for money would never control them again. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is simply refusing to let someone erase you. And Catherine Tilney Long